peace, salutations, greetings, good people. It has been quite a while. Life has been lifing. Today is Friday. We're at the end of March. Spring is springing. Um, there is so much going on in the world, um, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, and I am so excited to kind of be back after a hiatus for sure. I'm currently in spring break. For or wrapping up spring break from where I'm at, and yeah, and really nice to be able to slow down a little bit. I wasn't able to really rest necessarily a little bit, but a lot of it was kind of getting catching back up from things I'd fallen behind on, which is really, really helpful. And so, just want to thank you all so much for tuning in. I am super excited to be back and excited for this particular guest in this episode. But per usual, The Paper Plane is a podcast created and hosted by myself, Colin Masashi Rohahio Ehara, where I interview people I am so blessed and honored to share community with, asking them about a book or books that have had a transformative impact on their lives. And in a society where literacy rates are steadily declining, our attention spans and critical consciousness are under attack, and a growing number of podcasts hosted by cishet men consciously or unconsciously champion expressions of masculinity that come at the expense of women, femmes, LGBTQIA, Two Spirit Plus, especially BIPOC folks. This space imperfectly aims to operate as a counter narrative to those things. The Paper Plane is a space that intends to highlight the dire importance of relationships, community, dialogue, perpetual learning, honest expression as art, art as honest expression, freedom for literacy, and literacy for freedom. It speaks to planes of existence attached to the act of reading, but also as a metaphor for the quote unquote flights we take as we sit in what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls a one-way interface as readers and how these journeys shape us. So today, y'all, I'm so excited. Today we are joined by my dear brother, comrade, and friend, Virak Saroeun. He and I met in 2008 when his life partner, Liza, and I TA'd RASA 580 Educational Equity course. This was at San Francisco State University with Dr. Jeff Duncan-Andrade. And when Liza introduced the two of us, I immediately knew this was someone I wanted to be friends with, as someone who shared so many of the same loves for music, hip hop, DJing, critical pedagogy, shoes and fashion, books, film, food, beer and spirits, basketball, revolutionary politics and praxis, and so much more. And almost 20 years later, if you can believe it, this brilliant pedagogue, father, and human being remains my beloved and chosen family. So, y'all, Virak is one of four children and the only male. He is a child of refugees from Cambodia, first in his family to go to a university, and completed an undergraduate degree with double majors in ethnic studies and sociology from UC Riverside. He also holds a multiple subject teaching credential and a master's in education from San Francisco State University. For the last decade and a half, he has been a classroom educator and administrator in the Bay Area and Long Beach, California, where he resides now with his partner and daughter. And we're not working towards a more just and balanced world. He enjoys music, DJing, roller skating, camping, and outdoor adventures with his beautiful family. And with that, I am so honored and very, very excited to welcome my dear brother and our guest for today's episode, Virak. How are you, bro? So good to see you.
What's up, man? Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. This is long overdue, so I'm very excited finally able to figure out a date, lock it down. And I'm just honored to have you here with us. And so we are going to introduce. So Virak picked some incredible texts that we're going to be discussing today. And they are The Five Principles by Khnum, Stic, Ibomu of Dead Prez, and what is considered a classic to many in our social circles, Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. And so to kick it off, The Five Principles by Khnum, Stic, Ibomu of Dead Prez is this motivational and practical book guides readers through one man's life-saving quest for health and wellness in body, mind, and spirit. Award-winning rapper, producer, and champion of healthy living, Khnum Ibomu, widely known as Stic from the revolutionary but gangster hip-hop duo Dead Prez, has inspired millions with his music and lifestyle. But he wasn't always the people's champ of healthy living and hip hop. As a young musician on the rise in the late 90s, Stic was no stranger to self-destructive lifestyle habits like excessive drinking, abusing weed, and poor dietary choices. I don't know anything about that. Ultimately, his health paid the price, resulting in a dangerous diagnosis, leading him to found the inspirational healthy lifestyle brand and cultural movement RBG Fit Club and pioneer his own groundbreaking genre of music called Fit Hop. Stic's relatable, non preachy, proactive, and integrative approach to wellness is centered around five principles, and those are knowledge, nutrition, exercise, rest, and consistency. The five principles empowers readers to experience the wealth of well-being via the numerous tools and disciplines that Stick has lived and learned. In the second text we'll be discussing today, Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. And so in 1961, George Jackson was sentenced to 1 year to life in San Quentin State Prison for armed robbery. In 1966, he befriended fellow inmate W.L. Nolan, who introduced Jackson to Marxist Leninist political thought. This would later form the ideological basis of the Black Guerrilla Family. While incarcerated, Jackson educated himself on history, literature, and Marxist economics. Using a plastic typewriter, Jackson wrote many letters and political essays, which were subsequently edited and compiled for his books Soledad Brother, The Prison Letters of George Jackson, and Blood in My Eye. Blood in My Eye is a book of political philosophy written by George Jackson, co-founder of the Black Guerrilla Family. Jackson finished writing the book only days before he was killed at San Quentin Prison, August 21st of 1971. And the book was published on January 1st of 1972, the following year. So Virak, actually the first kind of question I want to ask is when you think about these books, in the line of kind of the paper plane, I'm curious kind of what journeys would you say that one or both of these books has taken you on?
Um, I think I think there's a lot of overlap, and then I think there's a lot of like difference between the two, right? With Blood in My Eye, which is like very, very more like political theory. A lot of like to me, it's kind of like a guerrilla warfare, but in the context of writing like within the US. And then, Stick's book is more of a, like health and wellness type book. But there's a lot of overlap in the sense like for both of them, they they both were incarcerated, right?
Mm,
Of course, George Jackson incarcerated up to his death, but Stick actually opens up the book with a story of what led him to get incarcerated, right? And I think like the similarities for both is like in prison, right? Which of out of all places is where they both develop this love for literacy, right?
mm,
So for me personally, I feel like everybody, I think everybody who loves literacy, right? And kind of in line
yeah.
with like with like the mission of your podcast, like there's there's a journey that kind of led us there, right? And I
Mm,
think for both of them, those are like the common threads is
yeah.
being in the worst, right? Right in the most unfree condition and finding a love for literacy, right? And I think George Jackson talks a lot about reading and how he met these like figures, right? Like Mark
Yeah.
Twain, Mao, all these political theorists that were influential during the time. And then, I think for Stick too, he talks a lot about he spent a lot of time reading, right?
Hmm.
And this was like them both like kind of spending time with themselves,
Yeah.
and I think for me that resonates a lot, right? Of just being with yourself and like really, kind of going through things, but also literature and like reading and this is the power of storytelling that really gets you to kind of go deeper, right? And
Mm,
I think for me, yeah, like depending on what you read too, right? So
yeah.
the journeys could be different for everybody, right? Depending on where you're at in your life, what's on top for you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think, in this kind of line, I mean, a couple of things come to mind. I think first and foremost, immediately what comes to mind is, someone who I know is, a hero of both of ours is Malcolm, right? And like in his kind of connection with, this direct correlation of his growth in literacy and, becoming a voracious reader in prison and how he even writes explicitly about like how he'd never, even though he was like in this incredibly, repressive, oppressive state of incarceration, that he'd never felt freer in a lot of ways as he kind of gained those tools. And so, kind of in line with some of that, right? So, Stick, right, he writes about the body as a site of liberation, that physical, mental wellness aren't separate from the struggle. He says they are the struggle, essentially. And as someone who has spent years, in classrooms with young people, doing work with young people outside of classrooms, also, how do you bring that understanding into your teaching? What does it look like to nurture young people holistically inside a system that was never designed with their wholeness in mind, especially if they're Black, Indigenous, or people of color?
Word. And that's a meaty question. So I don't know which aspect I'll kind of get into, but
Go wherever your mind and heart takes you.
I think for me personally as an educator, and reflecting on that time, and kind of being, you know, not in the classroom for a little bit the past 6 months. Um, I think I wish I would have did more, f physical activity, right? And sadly, like PE is not really uh that much of a priority in schools, right? And even when you go to high school and when you go to middle school, where it becomes a actual class that's dedicated to PE,
Yeah.
um, a lot of that is not really liberating, right? And I think being more so elementary and a little bit of a middle school educator, I think I could have done better, with tying those lessons in. But it was so hard, right? Because what gets the most priority, as you know, is literacy and math, right? ELA.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that scripted curriculum doesn't really speak to a lot of our young people, right? So a lot of the time is like spent on how can I find something that's going to resonate with my young people, right?
Hmm.
And I think um, now I think the challenge would be, if I'm back in the classroom to really think about what kind of stories I can kind of bring in, right? I think I can probably try to find a way to use some of Stick's book, in like as a narrative kind of exemplar, or a memoir kind of exemplar. But I think it's tough, man,
Hmm.
because of the right, and it's part of the structure and it's built into it to really keep you kind of tied to the standardized testing where you
Hmm.
can't really teach young people a lot of the deeper lessons that you wish you had,
Mm.
and I think for us, like as critical educators, like sometimes the best we could do is just try to bring in some of those narratives, right?
Mm. Mm.
Bring in those stories that reflect our young people, bring in the stories that that help young people see themselves, right?
Yeah.
In the stories, that they can relate to, that can maybe open something, right? And I think both of these books, right, like reading opened up something in both of them, right? And for myself included, and I think that happens for a lot of people who actually will say, they have a love of reading, right? Like there's so much power in how that can just open up different worlds that you never knew, either existed or
Yeah.
that you still want to explore and kind of dig deeper into, right? Because I think the power of reading really starts with like finding something you love, right? And we know this from even educational theory, right? Like how do you get young people to read? Find things that they enjoy,
Hmm.
right? Um, but the bulk of what students read in schools is not what they enjoy, you know?
Mhm.
So you're constantly up, you know, you're fighting against that mentality of like, I don't like reading, right? It's
Yeah.
for myself included, which you know, I think we probably get to another question was like you know, I myself like I had that was my experience, right? I didn't like reading,
Yeah.
you know, and I think if there was some kind of love that I would have had as a young person, that would have totally changed my world even more, you know, and
Yeah.
I think that's the most we can do, right? As educators, like find some kind of ways to just ignite something in our young
Mm.
people, right? That's going to get them to care about their education. That's a whole lot deeper than just this is tied to monetary gain, right? Which is like literacy for freedom, right? And like whatever that may be, and you know, you don't really know what's going to be it for you know because you have so many young people. Um, you don't know what's going to hit and what's going to miss. So it's just the constant bring in those stories, right? Like hopefully something will hit. Like young people gravitate to something.
Mm. Yeah, man, I'm having a number of thoughts at once, but I think um what something I'm remembering is, at the school that we worked together at Richmond in Richmond, California, years ago. I'm remembering in being in a PD where essentially we were kind of talking about the ways that, because I'm thinking kind of about the intersections of gender with the authors were discussing being of different generations, but, both being black men. And essentially, and you were speaking to the PE piece. And I remember kind of posing to the staff, which was predominantly women, female bodied, and predominantly also like, mostly white, and kind of asking, you know, folks to think back on their experiences with PE specifically and like how many, of them like really enjoyed PE or felt comfortable there. And the vast majority of our staff, I remember being like hated PE as a young person, um, really disliked it. And maybe there was a few who were like, I did like it, and it tended to be more kind of cis men and men of color. And so, ended up like posing this question of just like, because we looked at data around how essentially, the boys, the young men in our school were, who were predominantly BIPOC, um, were, essentially underperforming in all these different metrics, like kind of across the board when it came to, women, female bodied students at the school, and essentially kind of having this discussion about like, you know, can you imagine, the discomfort you felt for, I was like, for those of you who really like disliked PE and they had shared things like I felt unwelcome there, insecure, like these kinds of, feelings. And, and kind of posing this question, we had a discussion about like, what do you think like it would feel like to feel, the way that you felt in PE, in an academic classroom. Um, and, I'm thinking about like kind of, you know, in what ways, like you were speaking to, like, do you see kind of like the academic classroom, specifically in K through 12, um, not being kind of like a safe space for kind of the holistic expression of like Black and Indigenous, melanated boys and young men? And
Hmm.
in some of that, I was going to ask you, kind of about some of your, your schooling experience, because I know you were speaking to it a little bit, right? But like as a young person, I'm wondering, to what degree do you feel like you came across um, stories in the classroom in K through 12 that like made you feel inspired or made you feel like you were reflected? Did that happen at all? Did that not happen? And like, did it happen? And, did you have to wait till undergrad? But just curious about your own kind of K through 12 experience with some of that.
Hmm. Yeah, man. Short answer would be no. You know,
Mhm.
I wasn't inspired
Yeah.
um as a young person. And it's funny you know you mentioned the example around PE because I think even with PE, as much as I liked, you know, I grew up loving sports and just wanting to be outside. But in PE, right, like I wasn't super into PE, right? Unless like they were doing some activities that I liked, but also
Yeah.
um even in there, right, like there's an opportunity to do the same things that we do in academic
Mm,
classrooms, right?
mm,
Like build belonging and inclusion and all these things where there wasn't anything any deeper lessons, you know what I'm saying?
mm.
And for me, like my relationship with school was to I was just trying to do enough, right, to get by
Yeah.
and to pass.
Hmm.
Because right, the messages that I was getting is like to do well in school, you know. And of course, like as a refugee, first or 1.5, whatever people term
Mm,
that to be. That's all my mom could say, right? Like, just go do well in school. And and that's just like her not really knowing like the other struggles that you deal with in schools, which oftentimes has nothing to do with school, right? It has nothing to do with learning. So, um, a lot of times it was survival was more important, right? Like trying to get to school and trying to get home safe.
hmm.
So while in school, for me, like there was some kind of safety involved in that. But besides that, like I wasn't engaged in reading. I didn't like reading. I didn't like most of the stuff. I was able to do okay, right? Like I did good enough in middle school um to get invited to apply for like these magnet programs in high school, right?
Hmm.
And I applied to a few. There was like, three different ones, four different ones I might have applied to. And then I ended up going to Poly, and they have these academies, right? And it is called CIC, and Center for International Commerce, I believe. And it was like it's like the second tier below the highest tier, which is PACE. Um, and these are the magnet programs, right? Like if you were in these tracks, you were most likely just on track to go to at least a CSU or UC, right? Like that was the program. Like if you were in those academies. So, I was fortunate enough to get into those academies. And I might have mentioned this to you in other like discussions that we've had over the years. The main lesson that I learned in high school was to cheat. Like
Hmm.
that's how you was gonna get ahead,
Yeah.
right? Like, and what I noticed was all these kids in this magnet program were figuring out ways to cheat and ways to get over.
Yeah.
While, me being from, quote unquote, the hood and like also seeing like most of the kids in the magnet programs also weren't from the neighborhood, right? Like
Mm,
we had a lot of people, like we had a situation where like the richer kids were getting bussed in, you know what I mean? Which is kind of
mm.
opposite to what you
That's
think of busing.
super interesting.
Um, because Poly is in what folks would term as the East Side, which oftentimes when we said the East Side, which is the hood, right, or just like divested community in Long Beach, while a lot of the folks in PACE and CIC were coming from Lakewood, which is like one of the closest suburbs of Long Beach, right,
Huh.
or other parts of Long Beach that were affluent.
Mm.
Um, so I was like, oh, damn. That's how y'all getting ahead, right? Like that's how y'all getting over. Um, and that's when I learned what a cheat sheet really was. You know what I mean? Like it was literally like that, right? Like it was a
Mm.
sheet and cats had like answers to the test on these sheets and it was getting
Mm.
passed around, right? And it would probably be somebody in the earlier periods and it would get passed around, right? So whoever had first period, let's say you had English class first
Yeah.
period, it was a test. Somebody in first period was taking notes of what's on that test and creating a cheat sheet. And then
Mm.
that cheat sheet will get passed around to other folks later in the periods that's going to take that test. So, it had to be somebody who was like studious, right?
Yeah.
To like to make that and be like, yo, yeah, I'm shoot it to the homies, right? And yeah, it's probably like
And this was a
a
physical
nerd,
note,
right?
right? This is like a
Y'all
physical note
were,
being
right?
passed, right? Because
Yeah, it was
it's
like a
like
little
now
sheet
kids just take a picture
about
or
like
something and send it on a, in the phones.
so yeah, we got to think about the generation that we were into, right? We didn't have cell phones, right? So
Yeah.
you literally wrote it on a sheet, bro. Like we
Yeah.
wasn't, you couldn't just snap it and airdrop it. So
Yeah.
it was a little
Wow.
sheet, right? A couple inches, man. That's something you could
We
fold
had to
and
grind so much
hold in
harder.
your hand. Uh, so that's what I was learning, what was happening, right? And initially I wasn't in those circles of kids that were doing that because I was like barely making it, like I felt like I barely made the cut, right, to get into this magnet program. I was like, oh shit, like I really got to read those books, like I really got to do the homework,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm.
And and there was a situation where in my English class, like the teacher pulled me aside one day and basically called me out for cheating on my book report. And I was like, damn, how did she know? And at that time, like, wasn't no chat GPT and there wasn't no AI.
Hmm.
There was these things called cliff notes. I don't know if you remember these, right? There
Of
was these
course.
cliff
Yeah.
notes,
Of course.
red, I mean, it's not red, like yellow and black, right? A skinnier version of these books. And
Hmm.
oftentimes it was books that we would read in school, right? These so-called classics, part of the
Yeah.
literary
Oh
canon.
yeah.
So
Absolutely.
So, we had to do book reports, right? And I was like, this is before like knowing about the cheat sheet and knowing different ways to get over it. I found a Cliff Note version of a book. Um, yeah, and did the book report based on that.
Yep.
And when the teacher put me aside and have a conversation with me, I think she clearly knew from the conversation, like, yo, you clearly didn't read, right?
Yeah.
And then I realized like, oh, that's how she could call me out. And then, also as a teacher, I'm like, we have that gauge too, right? But at that time, I didn't know that teachers could gauge that.
Sure.
Um, so so I learned the hard way, right? Like
Yeah.
that wasn't gonna be the way either. But I also was like, all these motherfuckers cheating their ass off, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you edit this, but let me know if you want me
I
to
was
keep it
good. It's
clean.
good. Nah, it's good.
So so yeah, man, that was like probably the one thing that made me second guess about how I was gonna figure out, how to succeed. But at the same time, like that
Yeah.
didn't make me want to read more,
Mm, mm.
like that didn't make me like not want to cheat again.
Yeah.
I think I did do it again, but I did it differently.
Yeah.
So again, my whole process of getting through high school was trying to get over
Yeah.
some way, somehow.
Yep.
And it showed in the end because then when I had to do the SATs and the ACT to try to get into college, like I didn't do well on those, right? Like
Mm,
I couldn't do well on those standardized tests, man. Like even if I got A's in class, I got these
yeah.
standardized tests is not not my jam,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that kind of speaks to, the stat around like standardized tests being more a measure of your social economic status than
Yeah.
your actual
And
um
yeah. And how assimilated you are to the dominant culture.
exactly, right? And
Man.
there's a lot of references in those questions that, that I understand now that I didn't understand back then because that was like a class thing, right? And it was
Hmm.
also, of course, like intersectionality because there's also race and other things connected
Hmm.
to that. Like there was just some references that I couldn't get, right? Like,
Yeah.
and there's like the cliche example, like maybe like a yacht, right? Like if they asked me a question about a yacht, I most likely would get that question wrong, right?
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't spend time on a yacht.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I don't even know the reference, right?
Mm.
And I think the only thing that I felt like there was one time where I felt like a standardized test worked in my favor because it was a question about football, and I was like, oh, I know football.
Mm.
I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a beast on this question, right? And it was a math question, open ended. I was like, yeah, I killing that question, right? Because it was like, oh, I think the question was something around like the team had scored a certain amount of points, and you had to think of different combinations of how
Sure.
they could have scored that. And I'm like, oh man, that's right up my alley, right?
Yeah.
And I think for other folks, right, and I, and it's also a gendered question too, because,
Sure.
um, like talking to like my homegirls, like they didn't understand that question, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, yo, I think I killed it. And for them as women, and then for other folks who don't have no exposure to football, there was no way you were gonna do well on that question,
Mm.
right? And and that seems like a counter, my counter example, but like on the flip side, most of the time it wasn't like that. So I was often the one that was like struggling to figure it out because
Mm.
I didn't get the reference. I didn't, I didn't have right a highly literate household, right? Like I
Mm.
was first one to, generation learning English, right? Trying to figure out how to communicate, at home and then try to communicate to peers and teachers, that oftentimes, yeah, like I didn't, I struggled. I struggled with reading it. And again, like I just think I got lucky and just trying hard to not fail, you know?
Mm.
But it wasn't until like my second or third year of college, man, where I would say I understood what it meant to be a scholar and what it meant to be an intellectual,
Mm.
where like I was reading things seriously, and you mentioned Malcolm, right? Like the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I know is not like all of Malcolm's,
Mm.
it's not in Malcolm's voice, but that was one of the books that I felt like I read front to back,
Yeah. Yep.
that I felt like was a quote unquote page turner, right? Like
Mm.
I didn't know what that meant, right? You say like book's a page turner. I'm like, what do you mean a page turner? Like I don't want to turn any of those pages. Um, I'm looking away, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not interested in books,
Mm.
and that was one of the books where going back to my earlier point, it spoke to me because like even though I haven't been incarcerated, like I understood what those situations were, right? I
Mm.
understood you know, like George Jackson and Stick, right? Like feeling like you didn't have any options and like going to the street life and then yeah, that's all you cared about,
Mm.
right? And you just trying to survive. So um it's funny because for me, like the only thing that probably kept me trying to do okay and like not really joining gangs was, you know, for one, like my sister had started gang banging and I saw the traps in that and a lot of my partners gang bang too. And I think the only thing that kept me from doing it myself was I didn't really want to die. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was it, man. Like I don't want to get shot, bro. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get shot. Like I want to see what's on I want to see what's on the other side, If the
Yeah.
grass is green, I want to see what's on the other
Yeah.
side. Like I want to make it to 18, Like I want
Yeah.
to see what that will feel like. Like I want to see what my life could be if I'm able to go to college, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like my only motivation, but it was right there, man. Like and I knew if I would have went in that direction and knowing who I am, I would have went 10 toes down, I knew I would have got shot or be in jail. Like
Mm.
there was no, there wouldn't be no other way for me.
Yeah.
Because I know if if I commit to something, like I'm going in, So,
Mm. Mm.
so thank the thank the higher powers, thank the divine.
Hmm.
Like I just saw enough examples that told me
Yeah.
that's not the way either.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, as someone who loves you, grateful for your self-preservation as a young person to have you here. And a lot, man, I so appreciate so many things you're saying here. But one thing that kind of popped out to me was like this reminder around kind of intention versus impact as teachers, right? Because like you were speaking to the things around like like it, whether it was like our generation or generation now, right? It's like um there's like these learning objectives, right? But what students, because students are learning, right? But they might not be learning like what, is intended, right, by the teacher or the school, whatever, right? Because, it's like you were learning and, I also learned, right, as a young person, right? Like what's kind of the way to get, the path of least resistance, right? The cheating aspects, those kinds of things, right? Was like what I
Hmm.
internalized was the way that you get through these classes, right? It wasn't, um, that's what the logic was set up, even if that wasn't the teacher's intention, right? And so I think similarly, kind of where I'm going with this is like thinking about Stick, Malcolm, George Jackson. The intention for them to be kind of locked up, didn't have the impact that I think that, those that tried to incarcerate them had, right? It was actually kind of this polar opposite piece where they really found, a lot of kind of tools of liberation inside prison, ironically, right? And so, so George Jackson, right, he writes from a cage, literally, right, and still produces something that's spiritually uncontainable. And so I'm wondering, as a Cambodian American who's carrying the weight of people who survived genocide, displacement, how does Jackson's insistence on an indestructible inner life and or Black liberation struggles here and abroad resonate with what you've inherited in your life?
Um, I mean that's an interesting question because I think that the at least for Cambodians in Long Beach specifically, and maybe other places as well. I think for us as a community, we actually inherited a lot of um, a being apolitical. You know, we
Mm,
we
interesting.
we learned to actually shy away from politics, right? To shy away from um, speaking truth to power, and that's part of right the survival mentality
Hmm.
of coming out of a genocide, of like to be smart was to get killed, right? To have some kind of talent, to be some kind of intellectual, to have some kind of skill could mean death, right? And
Hmm.
and I think that was more a product of that than anything, right? And it's not like there's no desire, but I think that has kind of kept us in a position to not really move towards liberation, right? And really kind of just move towards assimilation, um, more than moving towards like, which I think, for Black communities, the mentality is to move towards liberation, right? Because of the history of oppression, right? And all these different dynamics. And um, so yeah, so it's hard to kind of try to compare the pieces, but I think for me, um, one of the things that kind of pushed me towards like where my political leanings are, and just where my political education has got me is, I drew a lot from Black liberation struggles.
Yeah,
Like reading from Malcolm, right? You got these two authors who you know are part of the lineage of Black liberation movements, right? So I think for me, one of the things that I probably was subconsciously doing was moving towards um, an anti-white identity,
hmm,
right? And part of it was more so leaning towards Black identity, right? And that might sound funny because I'm not trying to like romanticize it and like, trying to say like I'm trying to be this, right? But
sure.
I gravitated towards Black culture and Black liberation theory
Hmm.
and Black thought and Black, struggle because to me, that's the lineage that I think we should move towards, right? Is a
Mm,
lineage of liberation, is a lineage of getting free. And I didn't see that in growing up, right? And so once I started to kind of learn more and um, right, and that's why these books are so important to me. Like I realized like if I were to stick with any kind of identity, I would move this way, right? And it's really moving towards liberation and freedom, of all peoples, right? Which I think is really deeply rooted in in these books is not about, right? It's not about just the identity of being Black, right? It's about you taking also and making it yours, right? Like whatever you want to kind of carry, right? Whatever legacy you want to move forward, um, that there's just like the spirit of resistance and liberation that's not tied to any specific peoples, right? And of course,
Mm,
like
mm.
because of our history of oppression, like that means something different for everybody, but no one's free when others are oppressed, right? And
Mm. Yep.
there's nothing that to just like we can't have an oppression Olympics about it, you know?
Mm,
But we
mm.
also have to acknowledge where it came from, right? And I'm not gonna be like, oh, I didn't, like this doesn't come from this, right? Like I think a lot of, especially the way anti-Black racism is rampant in Asian communities, like
Hmm.
I'm not gonna act like that don't exist, right? And I'm not gonna act like a lot of the things that we have applied and we've learned from is actually from a lot of Black liberation movements, right? So let's
Yeah. Oh man.
let's give credit where credit is due, and then continue building the solidarity, right? Because it
Yeah.
ain't about really trying to pinpoint, who's who, right? At the end of the day, it's the power of the thought and it's the power of the imagination and the creativity. I think that's ultimately what's going to liberate us, right? And taking these ideas and continuing to apply it into our conditions, um, because what George Jackson wrote in the 60s and like early 70s, on the cusp of that of the 70s, like that that all might not apply to today, right? But there's so many lessons that that he was writing about
Hmm.
in the book. And then for five principles, there's so many lessons he is talking about, and it's part of his journey too, right? And again, drawing from all these different places, he draws from Bruce Lee and he draws from
Yeah.
and Prez, like, they took their logo from the I Ching, right? So
Hmm.
there's all these languages that we really have to be um be I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is. We got to be conscious of like making sure that we acknowledge, right?
Yep.
And that we speak to the origins of where it came from,
Hmm.
because sometimes that gets lost, right? Like,
100%.
and then yeah, we get caught up in these identities, and at the end of the day, going back to something Malcolm said, like it's more important that we unite on the unity of like who we see our enemy is versus just like who we are, you know?
Mm.
So I think that still holds today, right? And I
Yeah.
think like a lot of the ideas hold true today, right? Like
Hmm.
like George Jackson is adamantly talking about fascism in this book
Hmm.
as well, right? And we see it today,
Yeah.
right? Even prior to Trump, even prior to right? We're talking about the genesis of the US, right? We're not,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that word can be tied to any presidency, can be tied to throughout all the history of the US,
Mm.
and what's happening right now. So um I think like new language is great, but also like it's been said too. So you know what I mean? I think we
Hmm.
really gotta hone in on on making sure we maintain, right, like what we're talking about,
Yep.
that it doesn't kind of get lost on people.
Absolutely. And I think, one huge kind of tie I see between whether it's these authors, it's, you, the other folks that we, are in community with as far as like educators, and is that there's this really, really explicit, um, intention that we all have around not being ahistorical. All right. And so like I'm even, as you were talking, I was thinking of like the big bro Art Nelson Concordia, right, who once said, he said that AAPI people should need to have a once a year thank you black people parade is what he said. Right. And then he like listed all the different ways that, kind of black liberation struggles, even like so the more well-known popularized civil rights movement, like like changed all these things that make you know the lives of Asian heritage people um, just not as difficult because of the work that was done in the past. Um, yeah, and man, like I think like thinking about, where things are at currently, right? And just like how much of an attack there is on, right, on ethnic studies, on, anything that's providing, some historical reality about kind of, what, the genesis of this country and like how it has and has not changed in those aspects, whether it's, in regards to colonialism, war, genocide, enslavement, right, Orientalism, all these things, um, and kind of the importance, that we talk about regularly of like how do we kind of tap into like staring, having the courage to like stare all that in the face while also like being able to um, like not lose our shit, right, and lose ourselves. And so, I think it's really cool that you paired these books because, like so Stick, right, has these five principles, right? Proper mindset, proper diet, proper exercise, proper rest, proper knowledge of self. And they feel almost radical in their simplicity. And I'm wondering, for you as a father, as an educator, cultural worker, so many things, artist, right? How do you attempt to kind of practice those principles? Maybe not just personally, but relationally, as something you model for your child, students, friends, community members. Um, yeah.
Yeah, man. I think, one of the things that I feel like I'm always working on is consistency.
Mm,
Um, and it's funny, right? Because it seems like a very simple thing, but it could be
so
one
not
of the hardest things,
so hard.
right? Because again, the the way that our our society is set up, right? And all
Mhm,
these oppressive systems is our consistency becomes work, right? Or going to a job. Um, while the consistency that we really need as human beings to like live and survive and to like be whole are really outside of those things, right?
mm,
And I think this is why, you know, as an educator, right? And I think that's for everybody, right? Like we have to find these different ways to maintain balance, right? And so we have to figure out the consistency of those things, right? Like maintaining a workout schedule, if you're trying to work out, whatever hobbies it is, and I think for me, one of the things, ironically has become roller skating, right? And
mm-hmm.
um, learning that, like picking that up. I mean, I always wanted to learn, but being a father and raising a child, like one of the things that keeps me motivated to stay healthy. One is like, of course, like we want to live to see them grow, but also like we want to be healthy and fit enough to do things with them,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Right, like I'm sure when the babies were young, like I want my back to be strong enough, I want my core to be strong enough, so
Yeah.
I hold you up, right, for as long as I need to,
That's the
so
first
that
thing
my
I
back
thought about.
yeah, and like being able to run around so my knee don't give out, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to keep up. All the different hobbies that we want our children to have. And part of the big motivation is like I want to be able to do things with her, like I want
Mm,
to be able
mhm,
to roller skate with her, right? I want to be able to like ride bikes with her. I want to be able to hike with her.
mhm.
Do all these different physical activities that I enjoy like with her. As as we age, right? And for as long as I can.
Yeah.
And so, like there's that one piece of like having that motivation, and then again, like how do you develop this consistency? I think that's one of the big things, right? Is the consistency around making the time to do those things. Because again, right, like the thing that often is constant is like trying to go to work and right, trying to have an income. And if that consistency is what wears you down, then you can't do much,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Then you got to have the motivation and I think this ties to the other pieces because it's all tied together. Then right, this is where our mindset has to like kick in for us where like, yo, I need to do this, so I need to make it happen, right? And that's why I
Mm.
say like consistency for me is probably one of the hardest principles because
Oh,
it really
bro.
requires like intentional practice, right? Like we
Yeah.
really have to make that part of our world. And I know we talked about this in people's ed, right? When we were doing organizing, that one of the things about organizing was like you have to make it a constant in your life, right? Like it has to be a consistent
Yeah.
practice and part of the lifestyle. Like it's not like I go to a meeting, right? Once a month and I have this deep discussion with folks that I care about. But no, it's like it's the work that happens outside of that meeting, right? That brings you to the next meeting, right? Like what
Mm.
work is
Mm.
done that keeps you going.
Yep.
Um, that's a big factor, right?
Yep.
And I think what beats us up oftentimes is us having to survive, right? And
Mm.
so that's the big thing is like, where's my motivation that's going to keep me doing things that are consistently healthy for me outside of that 9 to 5 grind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we all got to figure out what that formula is going to be,
Yeah.
and where that motivation comes from, right? And I think right now, parenting is like helps motivate you too, but even if you're not a parent, like what is that thing, right? Because we all got hobbies and different things, and then also like how productive are those hobbies too, right? Because your hobby could be destructive, right? Like drinking or clubbing,
For sure.
So, uh, yeah, that's also another question of like, how do you maintain like consistency in ways that um, will keep you healthy, right? Because
Yeah.
we gotta do all the things, right? Like
Boy.
exercising our physical helps our mental, right? Exercising our mental requires us to like develop something to like right inspire our physical. And then, the spiritual is somewhere in between there. So, right,
Absolutely.
where is that?
Mm.
Yeah, and even thinking about reading too,
Man.
because I know both of us, right? Like we probably do a lot of audiobooks too,
Hmm.
like trying to find time to read. And then like again, like with my daughter who's like more engaged in reading now and
Mm.
again in ways that I was and seeing like the impact that it's having on her and how excited she gets about,
Mm.
reading about these things that are like
Love that.
fictional, right? Um, that I'm like, okay, if you're gonna sit and read, I need to spend some time sitting and reading too, So
Yeah.
there's that accountability in parenting as well that puts you in a position to like really model what you say, right? And I think as a teacher, that was one of my key things. Like I'm trying to model whatever it is I say, right? Like whatever habits that I'm trying to tell young people to have are habits that I'm also trying to have and working on as well, right? Like I can't be
Mm-hmm.
telling young people to eat healthy and then I'm cracking like 3 Diet Cokes, or like I'm gonna just bunch of chips, right, when I get off work or like,
Yeah.
and not to say like you can't do that, but again, like all things in moderation.
Sure.
Um, that can't be how we recharge, and that can't be how we rest, and that can't be how we um regenerate ourselves, right? Like it can't
Yeah.
just be those things, right? We have
Yeah.
to do those things that are going to kind of feed our soul as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Man, yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And where my mind kind of instantly went back to was I can't remember the exact like study or research or whatever, but I know, there's like this they call it like the three pillars of trauma-informed practice, consistency, predictability, and caring relationships, right? In
Oh yeah.
education. Right. And so I was really thinking about, that. And then my mind was kind of going to, Stick, his life, his artistry, his philosophies, and how like in alignment that is around just like I think, setups for healing, right? And for yeah, I mean the proper mindset, proper diet, proper exercise, proper rest, proper knowledge of self. Um and also just like how these, these systems are so set up to make all of those things really fucking difficult. Um, and and the other thought I have them too, right? And you already said it, but just like, like, I work really hard. I think especially with like, kind of alcoholism being on both sides of my family, um, and to like not, it's like kind of a slippery slope. But you know, I also know that like, on a Friday, like having a couple drinks with, a friend or friends, like sitting outside in the sun is like some of the most life-saving shit ever, right? That like really rejuvenates me and helps me. But like you were saying, like in moderation, right? Like doing that all the time, is not a good thing, right? And so like how to kind of, kind of think about these things holistically and how relationally they all kind of come together. Man, it's something that's on my mind constantly. Um,
Yeah, man, it's hard. It's hard to do.
yeah. Um, Switching gears a teeny bit, I want to jump back to kind of to George Jackson and Blood in My Eye. And a lot of this is kind of thinking about kind of like where we're at in this particular, moment in history, in US society specifically. But he warns, in this book that was written in the early 1970s, right? He says that reform is a trap, that the system will absorb resistance and neutralize it. And I'm thinking about ethnic studies, right? And so ethnic studies has been both celebrated and targeted, legislated for, legislated against. And as a veteran ethnic studies educator, cultural worker, I'm wondering, how do you attempt to hold on to the revolutionary spirit of the work that we've been kind of speaking to while navigating, institutions that are always trying to kind of manage that spirit, whether that was like your undergrad experience, when you're a newer educator, like at any point.
Yeah, I think one of the things is we have to always ground ourselves in the history, right? Like in the origin of ethnic studies, which which is really about, right? Like really putting our narratives front and center. Like I think that was like at the core of the fight for ethnic studies, right? Like we need, you know, speaking to some of the things that I, said like that I would try to do as an educator was like we want to center, right, BIPOC narratives, right? We want to center our history and our lineage. And so I think we've always have to stay grounded in that. And then also know that, because ethnic studies it gets incorporated into the system, that we also have to try to maintain some kind of control over it in some senses, right? Like we have to have some power to determine the future of ethnic studies, right? Which I think is at the heart of the struggle, right? Like one of the demands was that actually students would, right, continue to inform the direction of ethnic studies, right? That students would be a part of the hiring, right, process
Mm.
to put on the professors, right?
Yep.
So there's like a lot of that history that I think a lot of people forgot or just need to reground ourselves back into, right? That what we originally saw folks asking for is not completely what we see implemented, right? And so what we also see happening with ethnic studies being instituted is that it's also not being handed to those who would be best to teach it, right? Like myself, I haven't been able to teach an ethnic studies course, right? And I would be probably low on the totem pole to get that position because the way it gets institutionalized is to hand it over to folks teaching history, right? And
Mm.
that department, which is also like very predominantly white male
Yep.
um,
Eurocentric.
staff, right? And Eurocentric. So that's not what we want, right? And again, that's why I was saying we have to maintain some kind of power over how ethnic studies gets institutionalized. If we're going to be able to like kind of keep its essence, right? Or else it's just like diversity for diversity's sake, right? Like it's gonna become that. It's not going to be radical. It's going to continue to be diluted. Um, it's going to, again, like be run by people who shouldn't be running it, right? So I think that's one thing, right? Like we have to maintain control of those spaces, those positions, and how things get institutionalized.
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, not fall for the okie doke, right? And not, yeah, and not let these other fools take it over.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Oh, go
part
ahead.
of the reason it's attacks, right, is because there's power in it, right? There's
Yeah.
power in when critical minded folks take the reins, right? Because we also don't want our people there who are also not critical, who again, right, don't study the history, who don't understand like, the theory and the thought behind it, who don't really like hold those values. Like we don't
Yeah.
want those people in it either,
Yep.
right? Like,
100%.
assimilated ass out of here too, right? We don't
Yeah.
want you in there too.
Hmm.
Um, and sadly, right, like going back to like thinking in terms of like what George Jackson might think is if we're not challenging the institution in ways that they feel like they need to keep attacking us, then I don't think we're doing it like
Hmm.
we're doing anything, right? Like
Yeah.
because I think one thing I learned from George is that anytime we're going to do something that's liberating, we're going to get attacked, right?
Yeah.
In different ways, and he talks about it explicitly as like death, right?
Yeah.
That we had to come to terms with death. So, um, if we want to think about it, symbolically or a little bit more on the abstract note, right? Like handing over ethnic studies positions to white males, that's our death, right? Handing
Mm.
ethnic studies positions over to uncritical people of color, that's gonna be the death of us, right?
Mm.
So we have to maintain some kind of control over that.
Hmm. Man, so appreciate that. I was kind of thinking specifically too, like from, this fucking enormous umbrella that is, that encompasses what we call a NAPI, right? Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, right? Because I don't know, like even, like the two of us, like we're both handsome Asian men that share so many different, kind of alignments around so many things, and also, right, like have very different, kind of legacies that we emerge from. I have much closer proximity to whiteness, and just like thinking about, like how do we, you know, protect, and think about, ethnic studies specifically as like this place where, um, like there needs to be gatekeeping, and there needs to be, ways that, are strategic and thoughtful in how we do that, and how we call each other in, call each other out. Um, yeah, I mean, it's on my mind all the time, and also I think, just like even, uh, trying to be consistent, right? Consistent around interrogating myself, right? And like, in what ways am I complicit, conforming, consciously or unconsciously, right? Due to fear, hegemony, all these kinds of things. Um, and I really appreciate what you said about like the piece of like going back, to, like self-determination, particularly around students and like them, kind of having say over like how hiring, kind of things go, that kind of thing. And so, I wanted to go to this next question, really kind of centering, young people, right? I mean, younger learners, especially for you as somebody who is, like really, really well versed and a veteran around elementary age, young people. And so, elementary age children, it's a really tender, formative age, right? Both of, it's like our children are kind of in that boat at the moment. They're still deciding whether the world is safe, whether they belong, whether they are worthy of care, right? And with that in mind, I'm wondering kind of with these two texts, what have you taken from these two texts? One that's more grounded in wellness, one more grounded in revolutionary political thought, but both are grounded in each. How might we bring these into the room with our own children and or youngest learners, even if we're not, explicitly saying the authors' names?
Yeah, I think, part of it goes back to ideas, right? Like what ideas, what lessons do we want to teach young people, you know? Because yeah, like some of the stuff that we might be reading, as adult learners, that's not something that I would put in front of, my daughter or in front of young people, right? So I think it requires a lot of thoughtfulness and you know, and translating it in ways that are understandable, right? And it's not like young people can't understand genocide. It's not like young people can't understand oppression, racism, sexism, classism, all these things, right? And I think, you know, my partner Liza d does a lot of it too, is having these discussions
Mm,
with our daughter around like, what's happening with ICE, like why
mm-hmm,
don't we like them, right?
mm,
Like why is that, you know? And I think of, the work of like woke kindergarten, I feel like is a good exemplar of what it means to teach young people, right? These really complex theories, these like very like, you know, abolitionist, like liberational theories, in ways that young people can understand it. And oftentimes, really, the hard part is like we had to create those materials, right?
mm-hmm,
And we need more, and I think the more we're able to like kind of build resources and, you know, a school of thought around those things, the more we can continue to really reach our young people in that way, right? Because again, like even though some of it could be very explicit, the baby can understand it, right? Like the babies also need to understand they're getting killed
mm,
because babies are getting killed.
yeah,
Like you
yep,
can't say that's not happening, right?
mm-hmm,
And I think a lot of times adults lie to kids to
mm-hmm,
quote unquote, they say they're trying to protect them, right? But
yeah,
sometimes those are the people, and sometimes those are the things that do the most harm, right?
mm-hmm,
Is when we try to say that, but oftentimes speaking the truth and really nurturing our young people's curiosity around the injustices that are happening
mm-hmm,
is what we should be engaging and what we should be welcoming and what we should be trying to find language around, because I think we have a lot of adult language, right? But that was, I felt like the task as a educator of younger children is like, how can I speak to this in ways that you can understand it, right?
uh-huh,
Because I'm gonna have to talk to you about freedom, but not in those ways, and I'm not gonna talk about oppression in the ways that I would talk to, that like how we would talk about it. But what is that language that I'm gonna use, or that we can use to really get young people to understand what's going on and what's happening, right? And and, and that's going to, I think, continue that trajectory, right? We talking about scope and
mm-hmm,
sequence, right? We really need like a deeper scope and sequence from from the cradle, right? From ways that we can speak to in this revolutionary spirit.
mm. Mm. I really appreciate, you're speaking really explicitly to, the ways that, Jackson names, oppression, like really like, not mincing words around like the connection to death, right? And then like, and then your, kind of really, you know, sobering reminder around like, babies literally being killed, right? And, seeing both, whether it's social media or like the news or just even like, in our communities and people talking and these kinds of things, like, folks, you know, righteously, courageously, like, you know, speaking out against that, thinking about how do we, figure out in theory and practice to identify, resist these kinds of things. and also at the same time, kind of seeing, folks go silent, right? And like, and ultimately, kind of cowering, bowing to, fear. And I think that looks a lot of different ways, but you know, I I really appreciate, you're pairing these books for so many reasons, but thinking about, though I mean, just like at the heart of both of them, right, really is like, pieces around, freedom and liberation, and also kind of thinking about, what trajectory are we on? Where are we going? Where do we want to go? Is where we're currently like on path to? Is that where we want to go? Right. And so, kind of leading to, in these two texts, right? So Stick, right, he ends with this vision of health as freedom, right? Speaking to the liberatory aspects you were touching on. And then Jackson ends with a call to action that he knows might cost him everything, right? And we know that it did, right? And both of these authors are essentially saying the liberation of our people requires us to be fully alive and fully awake. And as a father raising, raising children, your own and others, right? A father and an educator. With everything that's happening in our society and world, what does it mean to you to kind of pass lessons on? What are you hoping to kind of leave in the hands of your own and other people's children?
I think one of the things is continuing the legacy, right? And part of, the way legacy is continued is through storytelling, right? And it's
Mm,
through
mm,
narrative, and that's why narrative and stories are so powerful, right? That's why, most of our cultures had an oral tradition because it was important for us to continue to talk about what was important to us, right? And if liberation and freedom is important to us, then we have to continue talking about it and teaching, our babies about it, right?
mm, mm,
Because if we don't talk about it, then they won't know, right? And then they're gonna be susceptible to all this other propaganda that's going to say otherwise, right? And then this is where this is where the self-hate starts. This is where, right, the lack of confidence, right? This is where the whatever bad decisions can be made because they didn't feel a sense of care for themselves, So um I think, and of course we're speaking from a place of relative freedom, right? Um, in that being able to have lived this much and seen this much. Um, that we, one of the ways that we can exercise freedom is really like taking, and I hate that we have to talk about it even in terms of capital and in
mm,
ways that are very like um, possessive. We do have to take some ownership on the things that we really can control that allow us to feel free, and I think we all do that in different ways to try to maintain some, right, some sanity and also to feel free.
mm,
Um, but also we have to continue connecting that to this bigger struggle, right? This bigger struggle of freedom, not just for ourselves, right? Because like I can like, you know, we can all just have decent jobs and eat well and have good hobbies, right? Travel a couple times a year and do all these things and feel like, oh, that's freedom.
mm,
But if you're not, again, like I think you mentioned it, right? If we're not interrogating ourselves and our privilege and connecting it to freedom, then we're leaving, right? We're leaving the folks who are the least free, right? And for George, this is why his book is so important because he's writing from this place of like, I already know death is upon me, right?
mm,
So I have nothing to lose, and not everybody's in that position, right?
yeah.
So um, we don't feel that way. And I think we always have to constantly retune and readjust and ground into right? The theories that are coming from the most unfree people in our society, right? Like we got to find ways to listen and find their voices and also like pull their stories, right, and bring them to the greater community as
Mm.
well, right? Like their stories also have a lot of lessons about what it really means to be free, right? Because
Mm-hmm. Yep.
you can't be free without right, without the binary, right? So how would you understand how it is to not feel free? Is you got to study the most oppressive conditions and people coming out the most oppressive conditions, right? Of being unfree, which,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we could say prisons, right? And I think the work of prison intellectuals is so important, right? And
Yeah.
that's, something that really inspired me from my professor at UCR in undergrad was his insistence on like we need to study prison intellectuals, and that's like the heart of his study. Um, so yeah, shout out to Dylan Rodriguez, right?
Mm.
That work is really a key piece in what it's going to take,
Yeah.
right? And if we forget that those voices are needed in our struggles, right, then those struggles ain't really about freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those struggles are always going to fall short and crumble, right? Like the non-pressure complex is real. Those orgs ain't the vanguard. You know, he talks
Mm-hmm.
a lot about the vanguard too, and like that's not really the vanguard leadership of a
Mm.
movement either, right? So folks also need to be aware of that, right? But yeah, there's so much that's required of us to be able to really be fully aligned in what it looks like to continuously move to freedom, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it all means something different based on your relative position to oppression. And I
Yeah.
think that's really like the hardest. And again, like one of the things that's going to help us is again tying it into like being unified on who our common enemy is,
Mm.
right? Um, because it's also not just like figures, right? It's not just like the orange man, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
right. It's not just the administration, right? Because it's also ideas. It's ideas that they're pushing as
Yep.
well, right? So that's also part of the battle, right? The battle is also mental. The battle is also spiritual.
Yep.
And all of that is going to impact
Mm.
the ways in which we live. Um, yeah, it's is to we got to continue studying. We got to continue again, like really grounding and acknowledging, right, our liberation fighters and pulling their thought and keeping it front and center.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially the things that are still applicable, because a lot of it is still applicable today, right? I don't think we need to constantly search for a figurehead, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
really about what ideas we want to proliferate, you know? Because really those ideas and creativity, I think, is really where freedom is going to happen, you know?
Mm.
And again, it's also this is why we're educated, right? Is like it's going to come from our young people. So we
Mm-hmm.
got to continue to nurture them and give them that safe space to voice and really figure out like what their ideas are and how do we move towards like those visions of freedom
Mm-hmm.
as well because ultimately they'll be the ones to figure it out, not us.
Yep.
We might be stuck in our old shit, right?
Yep.
um and they might be on something we and if we turn a shoulder to them, that could change the trajectory of where they go. So
Yeah.
it's really, yeah, it's really a fine balance of how one can easily get turned too, right? The dark side is definitely more attractive to folks,
Man.
and we can't let our individual like issues just cloud the bigger picture, you know.
Yeah.
We can't let that continue to keep dividing
Absolutely. I mean, I'm like to borrow a proverb from our African American siblings, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. I'm thinking about like a couple things. I mean, to just like, this would be a whole other episode or like a litany of episodes, but just like the stuff coming out about Cesar Chavez, um, and in the dark side, and like I'm also thinking of like a couple of my mentors, one who says like we need to interrogate like the white spaces that live inside of ourselves, the white supremacists, cis hetero patriarchal spaces live inside ourselves. We need to interrogate, the cop or the police that lives inside ourselves, right? That operates internally, and how do we identify and resist it with all our might? Um, but I really love too, your reminders around just the power of narrative, man, of storytelling. And we are unfortunately running out of time. I could talk to you forever, bro. But coming to a close, something these are kind of two pieces that I ask every single guest that I have on. And so the first in the line of kind of narratives and stuff, because I know that we both are just avid music lovers. Shout out DJ Undefined, the GOAT. So I'm wondering, what is a song, a musical artist, and/or an album that you would pair with these books, and why? Why would you pair those with these books?
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. The easy answer would, because
Oh, Stick.
one of the books is yeah is something from them. But really, man, that RBG album, now that we were having this conversation, I was like, man, I need to revisit that
Mm,
album again. Because I remember when it came out, I was like, yo, this is like really the spirit of what George is talking about,
huh.
like because George Jackson also talked about like turning the criminal mentality into a revolutionary mentality, right?
Mm,
And Dead Prez's album RBG, Revolutionary but Gangster, really rides on that lineage, right?
mm.
Which is a departure from Let's Get Free, which is I think it's a little more critical in some ways, right? It could be a little bit more out of people's understanding,
Mm,
right? I feel like it's a little bit more complex, right?
mm.
I think that one's like, that's like a higher level college text where
Sure.
RBG was like, let me bring it down, right? Let me bring it down and like connect to the everyday street cats
Mm.
and and make the ideas of revolution more apparent. And for me, like that was one of my goals as an educator was like, we need to make revolutionary theory popular and we need to
Appealing.
get it popping.
Yeah.
We
Uh,
need to make young people like it.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah. That'd be my easy answer
Okay.
is that because I think it really captures what what George Jackson is talking about. And and then it's it's also Stick on there too. So it
Yeah.
talks about different aspects. I mean, there is songs about health and wellness in there
Yeah.
as well. To some deeper political concepts that are very more like down to earth for folks to kind of digest and can easily understand.
Mm, mm. Oh, thank you for that. And then the last piece is could you please complete the following sentence? People should read The Five Principles by Khnum, Stic, Ibomu of Dead Prez, and Blood in My Eye by George Jackson because dot dot dot.
They should read it because it's going to challenge them to reflect on their own habits and mindset. And I think it's really going to get people thinking about what does freedom really mean
Mm,
and
mm,
what it's going to take for us to get there.
mm. Beautifully said. Brother V, thank you so much, man, for the gift of your time. This was awesome. I can't thank you enough. Please send love to the fam. Yeah, and just thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So everybody tuned in, thank you so much for the gift of your time. I'm hoping that the next week that you're going into goes really well, and we hope you enjoyed the flight. Peace.